In the boundaries of what appears to be an endless psychological and physical conflict, war poetry, whether having a pacifist or optimistic approach, raises significant concerns regarding concepts such as justice, bravery, and remorse. Such concerns are nowhere better embodied than by the tragic and intense poems named Shooting Stars and War Photographer by Karen Duffy. Both poems reflect the horrific consequences of war brutality, whether those who suffered and perished in battle or those who never witnessed fighting. Hence, the poems tackle the almost endless process of abuse in this manner. Although War Photographer confronts the moral question of documenting military acts and Shooting Stars emphasizes the significance of memory, Duffy employs figurative methods in both poems to insinuate that even those who can control the horrors of battle are so lost in their superficial and affluent ways when describing the contrasting psychological impacts of fighting. Therefore, both poets thus give various views on violence, but reject the simplistic human nature and the agonies of war unanimously. Carol Duffy was inspired to begin writing poems due to her long-lasting friendship with a war photographer. She was intrigued by the peculiar challenge faced by these people who are required to record terrible, horrific events for a living. Therefore, as Duffy investigated into her friend's state, she figured the tragic events surrounding them, as many people having luxurious lifestyles don't understand the severity of the events, and hence insinuate that they don't even exist. Firstly, in both poems, Duffy employs irony to demonstrate that many who have not been exposed to the cruelty of battle are unable to understand its intensity. The results of inner rhyme and pathos work in armshot to build a parody and sarcastic tone. For example, in stanza 4, Duffy says, "The eyeballs of the reader prick, with tears between the bathe and pre-luncher beers. They don't care." In this section of the poem, the photographer is now starting to see how the receiver of his work would respond to the graphic, severe depictions of battle. Duffy deviates from the sobering sound of the previous three stanzas to investigate the simplistic human experience concerning the dispute. For starters, the pre-luncher drinks symbolize a comfortable existence that obscures the seriousness of many world problems. Its potential to inhibit our empathy links to how succumbing to an overly luxurious existence influences how we conceive about our own lives and those exposed to battle, hence making the severity of fighting insignificant. Therefore, just as elements like a bath will cleanse one physically, it can metaphorically clear the mind of war in humanity. Those that become luckily affluent who may catalyze reform in an increasingly violent environment tend to assign their extravagance, which impacts moral judgment, minimizing the importance of battle. The inner rhyme of phrases like tears and beers juxtaposes the confident essence of the spectator in reaction to these hideous pictures, obviously establishing a rhythmic and immature sound to condemn the superficial nature of humanity as a whole. Similarly, in Shooting Stars, the heartbreaking monologue protagonist abruptly turns toward the unbounded teens. The usage of anaphora and juxtaposition generates a mocking atmosphere within the fourth stanza, which also confirms the subconsciousness in its war lessons. For instance, as Duffy states, after the awful moans, the boy washes his uniform. After the history lesson, kids run to their toys. Duffy provides a picture of a schoolboy washing his shirt and learning about World War II, which is the man's purpose in this poem. Furthermore, this phrase suggests that the schoolboy not only washes his uniform, but also metaphorically cleanses his subconscious lessons about war. Therefore, this exhibits that the youth are leading their own, lullingly mistled life. They are now allowed to play with their toys during history lessons. This term has connotations of honesty and innocence, reinforcing the idea that children living these favorable circumstances will quickly return to a nearly ideal life without looking at the poor or oppressed. Ironically, selecting an atmosphere along these lines reveals the egotism of those in control conclusively, insinuating that the only way for children to learn about the tragic events surrounding them is by getting forced to schooling, as they wouldn't abandon their luxurious lifestyle to learn about a topic that doesn't even impact them. Finally, the recurring word after is an anaphora and is intentionally inserted to denounce the dull existence of humanity. We see that humankind doesn't recognize or accept their acts long after misery has subsided and would therefore replicate them. Generally, both poems prove that people who aren't exposed to war do not recognize it, but view it as though it doesn't even exist. Throughout War Photographer, not only do the people grasp the consequences of battle because they haven't witnessed it, but also because culture indulges through superficiality that removes some morality, feel a momentary prick of pain. Likewise, in Shooting Stars, Duffy reveals that no matter how many occasions humanity is told of how inherently immoral fighting is, they will tend to be proud of leading a lonely life, isolated from the struggles of the planet, and ultimately repeating the errors of the previous century. Finally, both writers focus on irony when denouncing society's self-denying. Secondly, Duffy discusses the complicated connection between fighting and Catholicism by utilizing allusion. The protagonist in War Photographer mentions that his religion cannot remedy aggression. In stanza 6, for instance, Duffy cites the book in Isaiah of the Old Testament by stating, "All flesh is dust." The quotation is generally used as reassurance for those who have died, since the quote indicates that all who remain on earth will eventually return to earth. However, this quotation can't help to encapsulate the degree of war suffering. Interestingly, after describing the locations where the battle took place, the author uses this quotation to console console him, as it insinuates that life, or perhaps all of humanity, will perish and return to Earth. Nevertheless, bodies don't necessarily become one with Earth during every battle, but are killed instead. Furthermore, the term flesh collection reflects because too many men perish in combat who are flesh, not human anymore. Interestingly enough, the poet imagines himself as a priest, but no longer references to faith in the poem as the pictures grow, therefore insinuating that a quote meant to offer consolation can't do so for the narrator, who has had tremendous pain. Hence, the protagonist may no longer be a priest because he has lost his own religion. In comparison, Shooting Stars succeeds at insinuating that the best way to end a dispute is to embrace faith. In stanza 6, Duffy says, "Turn to me for grace, for I am wretched and lonely," which is a reworking of a psalm biblical quotation. From first hand, the last stanza is told, and this quotation is no different. King David's petition to God, in which he places all his faith in him. The Nazi government executed more than 6 million Jews during the Holocaust, which is the background for the poem, who were considered living incapable of existence. The usage of terms like desolate and confused suggests that she has been caught in a kind of prison by the Jewish woman's faith. Therefore, she addresses this quotation to German soldiers, urging them to condemn their anti-Semitic practices and display compassion by embracing their faith, thus suggesting that this is just a means of brutality to subside, and for Jewish men and women to flee the hell generated by war is for soldiers to apologize for the Nazi regime's barbaric ideology and voluntarily display empathy rather than add to the senseless and needless abuse. Instead, they were only met with sexual assault and brutality, as described in the preceding stanza. Given all these crimes, the sharp line insinuates the woman nevertheless positions her trust in God and prays for approval. Consequently, Duffy insinuates in War Photographer, even many who have experienced fighting cannot take consolation in their religion. As in Shooting Stars, she suggests that the best way to avoid the abuse is by embracing Christianity and having trust in God by the oppressor. Overall, because they are highly thought-provoking, Duffy utilizes biblical allusion and asks one issue regarding where religion sits during abuse. Ultimately, Carl Duffy's work will encapsulate not only the tragedy of war through by historical allusion, but the equally devastating response to it through irony. War Photographer also focuses not only on the importance of recording battle, but also on the societal effect on those watching those moments, while Shooting Stars reveals the tragic history of a woman going through one of the most merciless periods and the meaning of recalling the incident. Therefore, even though the poems will embody us with these characters, they're encapsulating their situation perfectly, and why we should care even if it doesn't affect us.